Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Rafael Stoneman. Raphael is some sort of a filmmaker. I've watched a number of his interviews that he's done with many of the people that I interview. Definitely interested in spirituality, both kind of as an observer and participant. And I understand I've heard references to you having been an actor a little bit, and all. So, but I'm going to let. Do you call yourself Rafi sometimes as a nickname, or you go by Raphael?
I used to go by Rafe,
Rafe. Okay.
but I've been using Raphael in the
Okay.
last couple of
So we'll
years.
we'll go for the full name. So I'm going to let you just kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. There's a cat that just came in and is visiting me real quickly.
I always have one
It's
around myself.
it's a wild cat that lives in the neighborhood,
Oh, good.
so she might
Hold
make
her up for a second.
She's here.
Very nice. Good.
My wife's gonna take her
Okay.
away because she
No
might
problem.
start clawing into me.
Sure. Yeah. There's a story in the Vedas someplace where this disciple was sitting, and his master had his head on the disciple's lap, and he was sleeping, and the master only accepted Brahmins as disciples, and an insect bored into the disciple's leg, but he didn't move because he didn't want to disturb the master. When the master woke up, he saw what happened, and he said, "You're not a Brahmin, you're a Kshatriya, because a Brahmin wouldn't be able to stand that pain. So I'm sorry, I got to let you go."
Like, yeah, that seems to be what's going on a lot of distinctions and stuff. But yeah, I let's see, I'll give you a brief little history. Um, Around the age of 13, I was having a lot of emotional kind of just, it's normal for a teenager, but I was sitting by the train tracks a lot, wanting to throw myself in front of a train, and kind of didn't want to be here anymore. And then my dad had suggested that I be an actor. He said, you remind me of James Dean. He said, you should be an actor. And I started getting very interested in acting and started reading a lot of acting books and watching a lot of films and reading plays, and kind of taken on a life kind of dream that I would become an actor and that would be my identity. And I kind of stayed with that, and went to New York City when I was 18 to be an actor. And around that time, my older brother, who was just a year and a half older, and my best friend, John, went to India. And they came back from India, and that had a strong effect on kind of where I was at the time. And my brother basically said, you have to be a human being first and an actor second, which kind of jolted me a bit, because I had been thinking that being a great actor was the only thing important, but it's pretty obvious statement. How could you even be a good actor if you're not first like a real human being that's had real experiences and come from that place? So that kind of shifted my focus a bit from this kind of self-image of becoming an actor and ambition, and started kind of a quest or an inquiry about what is life, what is the meaning, what is the real purpose. The three of us did LSD in Central Park about probably a year or so after that, and that kind of destroyed my ability to perceive as an individual when that happened. There was no longer like a sense of the mind stream about who I am, and there was just this vast kind of open void where I was actually afraid, that I was losing the function of being the form. And in that fear, there was kind of a resistance to what was happening, because of still that desire to be an actor and to be in the form, and to have the ability to even be able to smile at will. I couldn't do any of those things in that state. And it was pretty intense. And then I left New York City after that and became very focused on, I guess what we would say like the spiritual path, pretty much exclusively without any other interest to, have any other identity or become anything in the world. So that kind of desire to be an actor got turned upside down. And that led to, a lot of reading and a lot of contemplating and just kind of trying to find out who I really am. And my brother had gone to India again, this time to stay with Papaji in Lucknow. And at the time, I couldn't go. I had, young children, infants, and had no money, no access really to be able to go. And a friend of mine did send me a book, a Ramana book at that time. So I was about 22 years old. And I was reading a lot of different books. I was reading a lot of different teachers. And eventually I got very focused on just Ramana and his teachings and kind of put away everything else, like pictures of Yogananda and Babaji and all these other saintly beings that typically, we kind of look at their faces as the divine and try to get attuned with them. And so I just narrowed it down to Ramana. And around that time, I'd say I was about 25, the focus was to give up spirituality as it would look and to give up being involved in even something like this, like a direct talk about spirituality in an interview, to not be engaged in anything like that and just work, just provide and just stay in self-inquiry. Just as every thought rises, just inquire whose thought it is and just stay in that. So I did a lot of manual labor, and eventually that led to learning how to trim trees. And then I was self-employed trimming trees for about 3.5, 4 years. And this inquiry was continuing. It was being interrupted by what would be like strong thoughts or desires or interests, creative interests that would come back, stimulate the mind to go outward again into an activity that had the premise of like a result or a sense of doer, whereas the manual labor and the tree trimming was kind of like, it's an activity, obviously, the body's in motion, it's doing things, but there wasn't any sense of like a spiritual identity that could go anywhere, or an actor or an artist or anything that's a strong kind of sense of oneself about who they are in the world and what their mission is. Like I used to have that. Before I focused on that, I had this sense of a mission. And I think that's common to a lot of people that have these awakenings. You wake up and you feel like you're it. You're the one. You're the divine. Now you got to tell everybody. And now you got to transform the world. That's typically kind of something that occurs in the beginning, in the initial stages. Still has a lot of immaturity to it. But it's, it's natural. It doesn't hurt anyone really. But anyway, I ended up joining the army at the age of 34 after rereading the Bhagavad Gita and taking it very literally. So I joined the army, and they asked me, what do I want to put on the dog tags? And they didn't have self-realization as an option. So I put Hinduism, that I was a Hindu. So here I am, an American soldier in South Carolina, on the first day of boot camp, and they make you put all of your personal possessions in front of you, and they weed through it and take the things, that you're not allowed to keep. So I had the King James Bible, and I had the Bhagavad Gita. And this Baptist drill sergeant picked up the Bhagavad Gita and was like, what the heck is this? He's like, you're not allowed to have this. He's like, the Bible you can have, you know. I said,
Interesting.
well, I said, I need them both, drill sergeant.
Hmm.
He's like, he checked my dog tags, and he's like, Hindu. He's like, well, you got to pick one.
Actually,
And
my Jewish friends who were into Eastern spirituality often call themselves Hindus.
I was raised Jewish. I had a bar mitzvah.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I should have said Hindu. Yeah.
Yeah, you should have.
Then he really would have been confused. But the other drill sergeant kind of pulled him aside and whispered to him that, you know, you can't really mess with somebody's religion, which is, this guy was, you know, just ready to throw the Bhagavad Gita into the circle where he was going to confiscate it. But I said, I read them both, you know. He let me keep them both. And I didn't have too much time to read in that 9 weeks, but I was keeping a little bit of a diary, you know, not every day, but on the days that were a little, like in the evenings when I had some time. But that experience of the Army was kind of about completely disappearing into something that you have no choice, you have no, you know, control over, and you're just told what to do. And it was a great kind of like almost like going to a monastery, you know, where you have somebody instructing you on what to do and breaking you of whatever attitude you have to be rebellious, or, you know, think that you're, you know, directing your own fate and nobody's going to tell you what to do or how to do it. And so that was kind of a good training ground to just feel all of these things coming up, but feeling like there's no point to expressing any of it, you know, verbally to the people there, that they wouldn't understand, and just staying in inquiry, you know, staying in the investigation of how the mind rises, how it likes to start projecting a future, you know, how it dwells on the past, and just keep observing, you know, the mind in that way. And so 3.5 years I got out, and that was 2006. And since then I've been pretty lucky that when I first came out, you know, I was getting unemployment for 2 years while I was going to college for full time.
Did you go to Iraq or Afghanistan?
No, I went to South Korea for a year, which was pretty
mild.
late.
Yeah.
So I didn't, you know, go to combat or anything, which I'm pretty grateful for, because I had some friends that did go, and it was pretty hard on them to adjust, you know, to being in that combat and then coming back to like a normal routine.
Right.
I'd say, though, I was talking about this the other day, that, you know, we associate PTSD with the combat experience, but it's any trauma.
Sure.
And boot camp, in a way, was traumatic, because they try to make it, you know, like a simulation of that chaotic energy that you experience in combat. So they'd come in at 2 a.m. and start flipping beds. So you were always on guard. You're always on edge. And, you know, even now it's like, I never like the feeling if I'm going to be late, because they say in the Army, you got to be, if they tell you to be there at 6:30, you got to be there at 6:20. It's always 10 minutes prior. So I see that, you know, still showing up, where it's like, you know, I'm going to be late, but I still have like 15 minutes. It's like I have to get there early because of that kind of conditioning that was happening in the Army. But yeah, I got out, and a lot of stuff started to come up that maybe I thought was gone internally, but looking back on it now, it was possibly just suppressed. And then I finally got to go to India, which I kind of was my last strong desire of wanting an experience. Something that I wanted really badly to do was go to Arunachala, go to Ramana Ashram. And finally, after getting out of the Army, I got to do that. And I was only there in India a total of 10 days. And I was at the ashram probably 6 days. And I went up to the cave that Ramana stayed in, and that was a pretty kind of very profound silence was happening of just, as I was staring at this picture of him that was in the cave, it was the young picture, and all of these faces started morphing on his face, like bald guys and women and big bearded men, all different nationalities, just one after the other. And then it just kind of went blank, and it just got really, really quiet, where there was no longer any sense of like hearing one's own thought process. And I'd had some experiences like that before. You know, they come and they go. You know, intense kind of feelings of pure presence, I guess you could call it. But then the mind kind of kicks back in, and you're in what you would call your normal, maybe your everyday waking state. A lot of times we want to go back to that. We want to taste that, you know. But mostly I've found that it's just being in the natural, just being natural without trying to get anywhere is kind of what's reminded, you know, to me is all to do. You know, it's the only thing to really embrace anymore. But so I came back from India, started going to school, and started writing a lot of poetry, and was working on a documentary, traveling around doing that. And a lot of these like tendencies, creative tendencies, are coming back, but there's less of like a vanity or an ambition. You know, when I was 18, there was a huge wanting to be recognized, wanting fame. And now it's just like pure kind of expression. You know, there isn't a whole lot put on where it will go or what will happen or how to market it. And I've never been good at that, like the business side of things, you know, how to actually market anything or sell anything. I'm not a salesman. So just to kind of bring it up to the current, about 2 years ago, I met Natalia, and we got married. She's from Russia. She came from Canada. She was staying there, and we went through the immigration process and all that, which was actually wasn't that bad. We got a pretty nice interviewer. We got lucky there. And she and I have been living here in Ojai, and I'm still going to school because I got some more benefits from the GI Bill. And I work 2 days a week with ex-cons that just came out of prison. And I take them out to do community service. And it's basically the same focus of self-inquiry. It's just a little bit less of a practice and more of just a natural recognition that inquiry is where we are when we're not making assumptions, we're not drawing conclusions. That when we're just here, we are in the inquiring space, the investigative space of just looking, seeing, being aware, being present. And usually it's something that will come up that kind of distracts us from that which we already are effortlessly. And then we have to kind of run through this gamut of finding out what's going on. And it's some kind of deep-seated desire playing out, you know, and it manifests, and then you have to deal with it.
So when you are that which you already are, naturally, effortlessly, when you're not in a state of distraction, what are you?
When you are that which you already are?
Yeah, you just said, you know, that what one tends to get drawn off by distractions or motivations or whatever, and therefore kind of lose that natural state of being what you already are. And so my question is, when you haven't lost that state in your experience, when you're not in a state of distraction or off balance or anything, what is it that you know yourself to be?
Awareness.
Mm-hmm.
beingness. Yeah, that would be the best, the first two words to kind of convey what that is.
Yeah.
Just awareness, because the attention is going to move around. We're going to put our attention on a particular thought. Typically, we're going to repeat, we're going to have a little ritual that we do, a routine. And so our attention is going to just constantly play out, similar. You went for a bike ride this morning.
Mm-hmm.
I went and had a coffee and a cigarette in my truck. This is a routine. You're healthier. So these things are going to play out. They may drop away, but basically the starting point of being aware, if we just start from there, we'll see when a strong identification occurs and makes us forget that we're just this awareness that's here, that isn't really defining itself, or trying to become anything. Mm-hmm. But then we'll see where we're moved into an identification that is strong, and then we might snap out of it and be like, oh, what am I doing? There's no real joy in that. That's all kind of I guess what we call ego, the whole sense of egoism, of becoming and of achieving and, wanting some type of result. So then that's when, you would just ask yourself what you're doing and who's doing it. And I think the longer you've been in that natural habit, the easier it is to not get pulled deeply into that identification. For me, the strongest challenge has been with anger, because when the anger comes, it comes so fast. And if it's not caught before it goes outward, then I'm already wanting to flip a table or slam a door or rush out and drive off, erratically. Whatever the result is of that anger, it's going to look very, kind of aggressive and destructive. So for me, that's been the hardest thing to catch, when that feeling comes. I heard a story once, Thich Nhat Hanh was giving a talk, and I guess it was up in San Francisco, and this one homosexual guy, a gay man, he basically had gone to the Dalai Lama, and the Dalai Lama had made a comment, and he was upset. He felt that comment was somewhat judgmental towards homosexuality. So he brought it to Thich Nhat Hanh, and he said, how could the Dalai Lama say this, basically saying that homosexuals can't, the equivalent of like saying they can't go to heaven or something. I doubt the Dalai Lama put it that way, but I don't know the exact quote. But Thich Nhat Hanh sat there. My friend was in the audience, so he said it was like 5 minutes solid of silence before he spoke. And then he said, the reason I was so quiet is that I felt the seed of anger rising in me, and I didn't want to speak from that anger. So it took me that attention to kind of transfer that anger back into the stream of peace. And then what he ended up saying was, every human being is like a flower in the garden. There's pink flowers, green flowers, red flowers, and they're all beautiful exactly as they are. And that was it.
I heard a story about a samurai where the samurai was obligated, duty bound, to go and avenge the death of, or to avenge his overlord. His overlord had been offended or killed or something by this other guy. And so he went and found the guy, and he had him in a corner, and he was about to chop him with his samurai sword when the guy spat in his face. And at that, the samurai just put his sword away and walked away. And he explained later the reason he did that was that he became angry when the guy spat in his face, and he wasn't going to, he couldn't do his samurai duty in a state of anger. Yeah. So similar story, kind of.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been a reoccurring theme for me,
Mm-hmm.
as far as how to how to how to deal with the anger when it shows up, and how suddenly it can show up.
Yeah.
And since I've met Natalia, I've had to basically step up my game as far as my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I've been getting away with not keeping that anger in check, and I was kind of had been maybe rationalizing or justifying that anger's anger. What's the problem with it? You know, it's just another thing. Why is everybody afraid of it? But it started to get to a point for me where I felt like I don't want to express anger at anyone,
Right.
and that I have to hold myself to that and actually not do it. So I'd say, especially like in the last 6 months, there's been this process of feeling it rise and becoming very aware that it's here and that it has nothing to do with anyone else. You know, that it may seem like it came out of the situation where somebody else mistreated you, or, you know, you supposedly felt dishonored or disrespected, but to instantly try to shut down the reaction and let the inquiry fully take over, and then detonate within. It's like a little explosion can go off inside. And for me, I mean, I think at the same time of having a lot of like a short fuse in this life, it also goes very quickly.
Mm.
You know, it's never lingered for a long time. There's not like a holding of a grudge or a staying in this anger for, you know, more than 20 minutes, you know, an hour or something like that. And then it's just forgotten. It's like, okay, on to whatever else is going on.
Yeah. There's a couple interesting observations here. That you've read the Gita a lot, so you know that whole series about Arjuna asking Krishna what causes a man to sort of commit sin as if involuntarily, and then Krishna says it is desire, it is anger, all consuming and most terrible. Know that to be the enemy here on earth. And the explanation is that it's not that there's anything wrong with desire, but when desire is thwarted, then anger can flare up. And so there's a couple of elements there. One is that, you know, desire be appropriate because there might be a good reason for it to be thwarted. And another is resting in a state of contentment so that one's fulfillment is not contingent upon this or that or the other desire actually coming to fruition, but that the fulfillment is sort of inherent in your nature. And then there's, you know, because often you feel, when you feel anger, there's a sense of frustration. It's like I've been blocked, I've been, you know, I've been stymied in some way. There's that kind of feeling. But, you know, if there's a kind of a sufficient degree of inner freedom founded in contentment, then there's not much impetus for that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there's a use, I think, for anger. It's not like it can be the enemy, as you just said.
Yeah.
Um, but it can be an effective kind of energy if you apply it. You know, you can get a lot done by cleaning up, doing laundry, doing the dishes, taking out the trash.
Yeah.
Not that I do any of those things. Because my wife was like, yeah, sure, yeah, right.
Yeah, right.
But if you put it to use, you know, one of the things that Ramana said is get angry at the anger.
That's nice.
And, you know, some of the different stories of devotees, you know, that were living at Ramana Ashram when he was alive, and sometimes it would seem like he was laughing at people that were flaring their egos. Like it was kind of like he and the other devotees would be getting a good chuckle out of it.
Yeah.
Because it's the ego rearing its head, and it thinks it has, you know, all of this power and makes these threats and accusations, and it's kind of a joke. It's kind of sad. But he was telling this person, get angry at the anger. And that stuck with me. It's kind of like just an instant, mechanism to realize if you're going to take it out on other people, it's never going to actually go anywhere.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes, you just react, you go through your moment and it's gone. Like, let's say you're driving, and somebody cuts you off. You just, up yours, whatever, you react. And you don't hang on to it. It doesn't have to become an escalation of force, where you're pulling out guns and shooting at each other on the freeway. Mm-hmm. But these other things where it comes up very strongly and very personally, like I've been personally offended, these are the best opportunities to find out where you're actually believing that who you are is other than just pure awareness.
Good point. Yeah. It's like you're taking yourself very seriously if you get into a real tizzy over some guy cutting you off on the freeway, It's like, and also that it would imply that you're really not, I mean, there's a natural flow to things. Even if nature's out of balance, things are flowing naturally, and there's a sort of an artful Taoist kind of way of flowing through life and not crashing against things unnecessarily. So, if a person's kind of angry at every little thing that doesn't go their way, it to me it kind of implies that they haven't learned that art.
Yeah, it's an immaturity.
Mm-hmm. Your example of Ramana saying get angry at the anger kind of reminds me of the way firefighters in the forest create a backfire to kind of consume the brush that the main fire is going to go after, and that way they stop the fire.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
that's a perfect metaphor.
Yeah.
So yeah, it takes it takes a lot of effort, and then usually the effort pays off to effortlessness, and then you can go beyond both.
Yeah.
You can go beyond effort and effortlessness, but it depends on the situation and who you're speaking to, that you would say, apply a lot of effort, apply a lot of discipline, or give up effort and rest. It depends on the ripeness of the listener, of how that would be understood and be effective. Because to me, all of these things in the end are about effectiveness, usefulness. If I have a theoretical knowledge of the Gita or of self-realization, that's only going to get me so far. I can hold a conversation. I can write, really cleverly about it. I can get into great, discussions, and in my mind, I'm the next Adi Shankara,
Right.
debating with people. But effectively and practically, I'm only going to go so far with any of that. And so, what I've found is most of the stuff that I've kind of had as knowledge is falling away because it's become its own identity that no longer is relevant.
Yeah. Or would you say that the experience that knowledge referred to is blossoming to an extent that the knowledge is not so important as it was? It's more like it's like a cookbook isn't very relevant once you start eating the meal. A cookbook explains how the meal was made, but it's really the meal that is the significant thing.
Yeah. It's not to discredit knowledge, or even having that ability to study and deeply understand, mentally these teachings. I don't know, I because of that hot-temperedness, I've had certain situations come up, I think it was about a year ago or so, maybe 9 months ago. I was in the coffee shop, and there was this guy, Charles, that I had never met, but, a friend of mine had told me about him, and he was sitting with this other friend of mine, and he was kind of wanting to rewrite I Am That. and correct the spelling and maybe make a commentary of where the focus should be for the seeker. And I pretty much laid into him, like totally blasted him in a way that was extremely intense, where he got up and left and ended up saying, anybody that's friends with me, he's not friends with. He was personally offended. I didn't particularly enjoy the experience of being in that role. I don't necessarily look for that, but it does happen. And I don't know really, what the effect of it was, but it came out very, very, very much like calling him out and being like, enough, enough with this spiritual narcissism. The I am that is fine. It works. Leave it alone. Find out who you are. And,
Well, looking back at that, do you feel like that was the most appropriate way to interact with him, or do you feel like you could have done it in a more dispassionate way? And
I don't care. I don't have any feeling of like looking over the life and correcting it. It's like a poem. And I care when the anger comes, like I said, and if it's gonna be used in a harmful way, then I want to remove myself and be alone.
Yeah.
I don't want to just, attack someone or break up furniture because nothing comes out of it, and then you're just fixing a table.
Sure, but can't we kind of ponder a bit on something we've done that may have been, small-minded or short-sighted or inappropriate?
We
and
do.
Learn a lesson from it thereby.
What I'm suggesting is, in that very moment that you start that pondering, are you coming from awareness or from being a person? If you're a person named Rick and you have a life in linear time that you're monitoring, that you're the evaluator of, that you're the narrator of, and that you as that voice in your head decides that was not appropriate, that was appropriate, where is that coming from? What gives you that sense of yourself? Because as soon as you ask, who am I, that'll all go. You won't have that trail. You'll be back in the presence of pure awareness without any story. So I'm not looking at it, it was inappropriate or appropriate. It was mysterious. I don't know. I know that it caused him to not want to speak to me.
Yeah.
That's all that the effect of it was. But I can't really know if it was right or wrong, and if I should not act that way. Because I don't have a sense that really mattered, that this interaction with him happened. I do have a sense that if I start reacting in anger to my wife or to my kids, that matters. That has more of a value, like a currency of value to me, that it's not that it's not appropriate or that it's not right. It just doesn't feel true. It feels like an immaturity. But with him in the coffee shop, there's no reverb of feeling an immaturity. It's more of a feeling of that's what came through. That's what the mirror that he was looking in, and I don't know why.
Well, you don't have to live with him as you do with your wife and kids. You may never see him again. Which is not to say there wasn't an influence, but I don't mean to be getting on your. I'm not trying to get on your case here. I'm just saying the general principle. Here's the general principle. I mean, you just said, well, if you're kind of narrowed down into looking at it as Rick or as Raphael or whatever, then maybe you're not totally settled in presence, and so you're kind of in a more individuated condition, and you're not seeing the whole picture or something. But what I would contend, and this often comes up in interviews, is that we are all those things simultaneously. There are many. Life is paradoxical if you look at it in its entirety, because there are sort of, even in the realm of physics, there are laws at one level which are completely irrelevant at another level, and ultimately there are no levels. But when you focus in on one or another level, then you see that there are different nature functions differently on those levels. So,
Yeah, yeah.
as human
I've
beings,
I've heard you say that.
yeah,
That
yeah.
kind of model.
Hmm.
Um, it's to me that's not really something I would argue or dispute, because that's kind of like just you're speaking conventionally about nature and science.
Yeah.
So, but I would say it's more relevant to find out how significant that model is to your actual everyday life,
Hmm.
and then to find, if you're interested, like if a person's actually interested in what we're calling liberation or realization, if the focus is self-realization, everything's spontaneous at that point. You're not living your life based on a model that you've constructed or understood. You're free of that. That
Right.
may come back as a way to dialogue, but if the emphasis is always on the explanation of how things are, I've found I miss what's actually happening.
Sure, I agree with that. And a fundamental point here, which you brought up a little while ago, is that what's really important is that whatever you are living in terms of spirituality, you are actually living it and experientially,
Yeah,
in your blood and bones. You're not just sort of hanging on to some
exactly.
concepts you read in a book or something like that.
Exactly. That's why
I totally agree with that.
yeah, that's why I'm not, trying to present an image of, attaining anything.
Right. Yeah.
You know, I'm not a teacher. I'm not somebody that, has a following. I'm not pushing anything, because I just see that as an identity that now you have to serve. To me, I'm happier when I don't have any plans. Of course, you make plans. You do have to do things. You keep fuel in your car, and you change the oil, and you feed the body, and you go earn money to provide for kids, and all that is happening. So I'm not saying, to just sit under the tree and go into a trance and never get up. But it's just not relevant to me to have an identity about where life is going and some mission. To me, that seems to all fall. Whether it may go on, it may continue quite, like your show may continue effortlessly in terms of people call you, somebody refers you. The work is happening through your hands. The activities are happening, but it's not resting on Rick Archer's need, to be recognized or need to reap anything from it. Life is just kind of using you as an instrument to engage in this way.
Yeah, I have that sense. And as Rick Archer, I have the sense that I really enjoy this, and I don't pretend that I don't. It's like I'm not completely like impersonal and dispassionate about it. This is something I enjoy doing. I also enjoy cross-country skiing and, riding my bicycle and various other activities that are kind of pertinent to my makeup. And we all have our dharmas. And I wouldn't necessarily conclude that somebody who's sitting up on a dais in front of 300 people is locked into some small, self-centered, egotistical self-concept. Some of them very well maybe, and some of them who are perhaps not, mature enough to really take on such a role, it might really bloat their egos. But I think a good many of the more genuine ones, or all the more genuine ones, can function in that kind of capacity, and yet remain in a very simple, innocent, humble kind of condition. That knowing and experiencing that it's not about them; it's more about the knowledge that's being kind of
Yeah,
channeled
for
through
sure.
them. Yeah, yeah.
For sure. Some people just end up in that role, and they're not necessarily trying to, fulfill an image, self-image or
Yeah, they're
anything.
good at it,
There's a
I
saying
mean,
that
Eckhart Tolle,
yeah,
people like that, they're just good at it, and so it kind of just
yeah,
snowballs in their life.
yeah. There's a saying too that, there aren't any false gurus. There's only false devotees.
Hmm.
I just came across that. I thought it was interesting.
What do you think that means?
Well, basically, if what you want, not you, Rick, but you, anyone, is to actually be free of your own sense of division or duality within yourself, as there's a me and there's a God, and I want this God. Can you provide it? Can you give it to me? Mm-hmm. Which is basic duality. If what you want is to actually realize that God is doing everything, mm-hmm. that God is the one living, that God is the one, or the self is the one wanting to know itself directly, not some secondary agent called a me, right. Wanting to actually, I want enlightenment now. Now I want to be enlightened, which again, it's just like somebody saying, I want to be a race car driver. It's just a desire, right, that implies that you think you're already a separate person that's going somewhere. So if that's what's burning in someone, that drives them to go to India, to go looking for a guru, then there's nothing you're going to, say or do that's going to stop them from going straight to whatever they can find. Now, they may find what somebody else says is a false guru, that they themselves maybe 5 years later say is a false guru. Right. But that particular guru represented what they needed to find out about themselves, mm-hmm. not about the teacher, because they're left with themselves. They have to be free of whatever confusion is in their awareness. They have to do it. So in that sense, if the devotee or the disciple or the seeker doesn't actually want to wake up, they're going to play out this game for a while, and it's all fine. It's not like anything's being harmed, ultimately speaking, because we're talking about eternity.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good explanation. I really I love what you just said, and I totally concur. And I can think of a number of gurus that, in my opinion, I wouldn't want to hang out with them, or wouldn't want to have hung out with them. Some of them are deceased, but I've met people who did hang out with them, with whom I'm very impressed. Like, whoa, these people have really gained some spiritual maturity, and in many cases, some of those people kind of look back at that as having been a phase that they wouldn't redo at their present level of maturity. Like they can see the flaws that their teacher had now in retrospect, from a distance, but it was just the perfect thing for them at the time, and they acknowledge that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've gotten to many points where I was very absolutist, very extremist, very intensely dismissive of the relative, of the world appearance, mm-hmm. And, on one level, that's absolutely true, that it all goes away in deep sleep. You're not aware of your form. Yeah. You're not aware of the trees. You're not aware of any world. You're just resting in beingness. And that's very true. You can say there is no world. But once you become adamant about that as a reference point and take it on as a belief, you've already gotten into some confusion. Yeah. Because the fact of it is, if it's seen and understood, it doesn't mean that you have to convince anyone of that, especially yourself. You don't have to convince yourself. So I've fallen into that convincing. When I'm trying to convince the one I'm speaking to, I'm trying to convince myself. Yeah. I'm in that basic dualistic confusion. And then you kind of wake up out of that, and it's like, well, that's a house of mirrors.
That's a very good point. I think fundamentalists fundamentalists are always trying to convince someone of the thing that they have a doubt about.
Yeah. So when you see that, it's like either you keep on denying that, or you kind of stay with that seeing and be honest about it and let it be effective. I don't want to walk around arguing about the nature of the world. It's this, it's that. The ego doesn't exist. It does. Like, that gets pretty tiring.
It's much easier to say, to use the Search paradox analogy, both are true. You know, it's this and it's this, and maybe ultimately it's this and not the more superficial consideration, but in its own way, the superficial consideration has validity.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, so we can say, fine, there's no universe, it's all absolute, everything is unmanifest, nothing ever happened. All of that's absolutely true, and at the same time, the opposite is true. There is a universe. There are laws of nature. There's gravity. There's photosynthesis. There's your body. There's cells. There's your family. You know, all this stuff, and you can take that, boil it right back down again, and say there's nothing. But you know, as I understand it, real spiritual wisdom incorporates the whole gamut, and harmonizes all these paradoxes within itself.
Yeah, I like that. It's got to have for me, what am I looking at is peace. Am I at peace in the midst of all of this?
Yeah.
Or am I really actually feeling completely like you know, going through something that's hell, you know, that's not enjoyable, that doesn't have a sense of grace to it, or however you want to put it, you know, however we use different ways of describing it. But in the end, I can get, you know, argumentative as quick as I can get angry. And I can then, again, rationalize, you know, the usefulness of it. But more and more, I feel the less stimulation you give the kind of speculative mind, or the mind that wants to hold the knowledge, because a lot of times it's like somebody's a scripture holder, and they're just, this person's not realized, that person's not realized, that one can't be because they do this.
Right.
It's an interesting phenomenon that I've found the best way to be effective is to silence that. Mm-hmm. You know, and if that means not interacting with that person, then that's probably the best approach, because we're wanting to silence that within ourselves so that we can actually be clear, actually be present, and be an instrument that really is used in a pure way, without all of this self-deceit or this egoism sneaking back into it.
Also, if we take a martial arts metaphor, Aikido, for instance, you know, rather than opposing the opponent and trying to fight, you know, rigidity with rigidity, if you somehow just do it in such a way that his own energy, if his own energy flips him, and what the metaphor relates to is that, you know, in a way, whatever anybody says, they're right, because they've got a piece of the puzzle. You know, it's not necessarily the whole puzzle, but if you just keep that, and if you have the whole, kind of keep the whole puzzle in your awareness, you realize, okay, that piece is valid. It may totally conflict with this piece over here, but it's valid in its own right. It's just not the whole picture.
Because everyone's describing different parts of the elephant.
Exactly. Yeah, and being very convinced that their part is the elephant. You know, that's all there is to it.
I was thinking of Jackie Chan in the drunken, where he does the drunken technique of fighting.
I didn't see that one. No, what is he?
Because it makes the other person kind of take themselves out of the equation. Instead of fighting the person, you kind of just maneuvering where they're fighting with themselves.
Yeah. I noticed in this piece that I read on the internet the other day that you wrote recently that you've gone and interviewed a lot of people, you know, Francis Lucille and various other people, and listened to a lot of people and checked them out and everything. And you've had this tendency of initially kind of thinking, this person's a phony, or I don't like this guy has too opulent a house or some such thing. But then after a little time, you kind of mellow out and think, well, that's okay too, you know. And actually, he's saying he's got some wisdom here.
Yeah, it's a strong tendency for me to be kind of judgmental towards what we would call spiritual materialism. Mm-hmm. It's just a very strong hook that, you know, I apply it to my own life, and that's fine. I don't do things that don't feel authentic to me, but projecting it outward onto what's happening in others' lives keeps showing up to me as not relevant. I wouldn't live in such a house like Francis Lucille lived in, but that's me. That's my sensibility. He was raised in, you know, France and was wealthy and grew up that way, and that's just kind of maybe his natural inclination to have a house with nice architecture and beautiful skylights, and that's what he's expressing.
And
I wouldn't.
he may not have bought that house with money he earned as a spiritual teacher. He may have inherited it,
Yeah,
or
he had it going
whatever.
into it too.
Yeah, yeah,
And but the main point is, you know, again, it's like a stopping point with the critical mind and saying and applying self-inquiry. You realize that every human being is being played by this one absolute essence.
yep,
It can't be any other way. So it can't be, who am I actually blaming for living in that house? Is it the man, Francis Lucille, or is it the absolute itself?
yeah.
And if I think it's off and it doesn't know what it's doing, who am I?
Then you've really got a problem. Yeah, I would say the absolute wants to experience itself as Francis Lucille living in a nice house, and over here it wants to experience itself as Joe Schmo living in a jail cell. So there's, all the variety.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was preparing for interviewing Anita Murjani this weekend, and she had to postpone again. She's very much in demand. So I appreciate your having come on the spur of the moment. But one interesting point I was going to... Anita is this woman who had, I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she had this near-death experience. She was within hours of dying from severe cancer. She had lemon-sized tumors all over her body, and she was in a coma, and she was checking out. And then she had this profound near-death experience in which she realized that her true nature was this vast, profound, wise condition, and she realized that's everyone's true nature, and that we're all kind of locked into smallness by the density of the world or something. And then she came back from that, and her cancer healed up really quickly, and she's fine now. But it's interesting to consider, what our... we always talk about our true nature, presence, silence, or whatever. How deep can that go? How clear can it be? And if it were utterly deep and utterly clear, how would it compare with what we accept now as a state of presence or silence? And if you've listened to some of my interviews, this is also a theme that I kind of bring up, and I happen to be of the opinion that spiritual unfoldment is an ongoing process. And when people say, I'm awake, I have arrived, I'm done, I'm always kind of suspicious of that, and I feel I feel that fine, it's a stage, and it may be very gratifying, and it might seem like you're done because this stage is so gratifying, but there's no telling how.
Well, what would it mean to be done?
Good question. I mean, I honestly don't know, because I don't think there is such a thing.
Birds are chirping, the sun is coming up, rain is falling. What does it mean for a human being to be done? And
yeah.
Basically, when you wake up, that's where your work actually begins.
I would tend to agree with that, yeah.
Now, the fundamental understanding, when we're talking about it on the understanding level, that I would stress, is that sense of being the individual doer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If that's not understood, that it's not even logically possible, because of everything being one thing, one totality of existence operating through everything and everyone, that there's any room there for a separate entity to also be like a co-creator of anything, to me is not logical if you just take it on the pure mental level of understanding, which, again, I said earlier, I don't want to just dwell there.
Continue. I'm just turning off the phone bell.
Yeah. So the awakening gives you a taste, like a direct meal, as you said earlier, instead of the menu, of that totality of awareness and the depth.
Yeah.
And then life kind of comes back and actions start happening again. You can talk about why. You can talk about karma, you can talk about destiny, all that. You can go into that intellectually, but that's not relevant either. What you're left with is there's an awakening, there's a sense of that vast presence, and then there's this kind of return to the normal activities of whatever your life is, or there might be a total change. You may no longer work at that factory. You
Yeah.
may no longer be with that relationship. You may move instantly. Everything might start hopping and popping as far as on the manifest level of your life and how it looks. But the idea that you then have that you're done, who's holding it?
Right.
Who is saying it, and to who, and what does it mean?
Yeah.
That's
Those are,
the part that I agree with you, where it's like it's not even that interesting as a statement.
yeah. No, I tend to agree with all that. And in my experience, both my own and observationally, you can have all sorts of profound spiritual awakenings, but then it's a matter of integrating that into life, and learning to function in a more awake state. And as you said, you might change jobs, you might change relationships. There can be all kinds of reshuffling that necessarily takes place because that kind of more vast awareness no longer kind of fits within the structures of your life as they existed. And you need to kind of build a bigger house or whatever, metaphorically speaking. I don't know if that's an adequate response to what you just said. I was a little distracted by the phone just
Yeah,
ringing.
yeah.
But
No problem.
yeah.
It is.
But
I'm feeling like I'd like to maybe wrap up in the next 5 minutes, if that's
okay.
possible.
Yeah, sure. We can do that. I'm just batting around ideas with you. I had a feeling that this would be the nature of this interview, that we just kind of take certain concepts and knock them back and forth, and give people an opportunity to think about the things that we're thinking about. So this might be a good stopping point then, since you've said that. Is there anything else on your mind that
Well,
feel?
I recently, Natalia and I made a documentary called Living Non-Duality here in
I
El.
listened to that. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it's free. It's on Vimeo. It's on my website, which
Hmm.
is a nonprofit that we're developing, and just it's kind of like growing organically, this nonprofit idea, and just seeing where it goes. But
Hmm.
the um, the video doesn't have a lot of Robert Wolf in it, but it's actually all inspired and kind of surrounding him. And he's here in OI, and he's a very clear non-dual teacher,
Right.
in that sense. And I met him, and all these different things started happening, and the film happened, and I'd love it for people to see it. I feel there's a lot of usefulness there that people can dialogue about, to kind of look back at their own minds as a reflection of where they're getting hooked into the conceptual. Yeah, so that's the only thing I would want to bring people's attention to, that we just recently did.
Yeah, good. Well, I'll link to that from my website. So I would say if I had a concluding point I wanted to make, it would be to say to people in general, don't rest on your laurels. Don't be in a hurry to kind of conclude that. I mean, it's one thing to say I've given up seeking, and to me that means you've given up, or you've gone beyond the sort of desperate, gnawing, unfulfilled, gotta get it or I'll die feeling that new spiritual aspirants often get, that really kind of drives them
Yeah.
crazy for a period of time. But it's another thing to continue. I mean, one can get to a point, and most people do after a while, that relaxes and they don't feel this sort of desperation. But the discovery never stops. Seeking and discovery are different things. You may stop seeking in that sort of empty kind of unfulfilled way, but you never stop discovering. There's always more to unfold, more to realize, more subtlety, more depth, more refinement.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I like that. Can I ask one thing? What book are you talking about? To my wife? Oh, my wife wanted to mention I have a poetry book, but it's
Is it
we
on your
don't have
website, or is there a link to it, or
we
is it on
don't have it.
Amazon or anything?
We don't have it. Like, I had published 100 copies of it, and
Uh huh.
all those have been given out. So I'll post something on the website if we end up publishing more.
Okay. Good.
But there's poems that are written there every maybe once a week, twice a week, whenever I kind of wake up in the middle of the night and feel a poem happening. But
That's great.
I appreciate having this opportunity, Rick.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks again for your flexibility and doing this on the spur of the moment.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah, so let me make it just a concluding remark very quickly. I've been speaking with Rafael Stoneman. I'll link to his website. You can check that out. Look at his documentary. I found it quite interesting. And he has a blog there that he writes various things, and there's ways of getting in touch with you there, I presume, if a person wants to do that. This is an ongoing series of interviews. In case this is the first one you may have listened to, I do a new one each week. And if you would like to be notified when each new one is posted, then you can either subscribe to the YouTube channel, and YouTube will notify you, or you can sign up on my website, batgap.com, BATGAP, for an email notification that you'll get once a week. And there's also a discussion group there that gets quite lively. It's very often the same voices, so it's nice to announce this and let new people come in and interact. But sometimes we end up with hundreds of posts on even one interview, going into depth about some of the things that were discussed. So if that appeals to you, come there, do that. I also am applying for 501c3 status. Finally got the application sent in. It hasn't been approved yet, but the accountant says it'll be a slam dunk. So there's a donate button on my site, and people should be able to get a tax write-off for making donations. Thank you, everybody, for one more thing. There's an audio podcast, so if you like to just listen to things on your iPod instead of having to sit in front of your computer, you can subscribe to that. So thanks again, Raphael. Thank you, everybody, for listening or watching, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you, Rick.